Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Now in this video I will teach you guys when to use functions. So let's open up a script and service so we can talk about this together. And we'll write it right here, when to use functions. Okay, now before we begin, I just have to say you should always be using local functions when you can. So local functions when you can. Okay. Now, this is what a local function looks like, local function, and then you would have the name of that function, whatever you want to call it, my code, and then you would put multiple things in here, okay? Now, this is a better version of functions, okay? Another way of writing function is function my code, again, or my code 2, and then this is a global function, okay? So local function, global function. And the only difference between this is that if we look at a local function, we can't call it above it, okay? If we put my code, it doesn't reference it and it errors, okay? But with global functions, it doesn't error. And that's how you would call a function. You would just put the parentheses and then put the name. But this wouldn't error, but the thing about this is that this is not defined, okay? If the code runs from top to bottom, and the function is not defined yet, then this is gonna error. Okay, so let's run this and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so we called the function and it's gonna say that it's nil because it did not define. It says attempt to call a nil value, and it's on line 6. And when we see line 6, it says it right here that the function attempt to call a nil value, and that's because the function wasn't even defined. So although it wasn't erroring, it wasn't defined. The function didn't run through and the function wasn't defined yet. Okay, so that's why I just recommend local functions, because local functions, you know, would give you the error and there's really no difference. Okay, local functions is just avoids that unnecessary self-thinking. So always use local functions and it's a little tiny bit faster. But anyways, let's stop that. When should you use functions? That's the point of the video. Now the first thing, let's put it right here and let's delete that. The first thing, we should always use functions. Use functions when referencing it multiple times. Okay, now this is very difficult to do. Okay, well actually it's not very difficult, but it's what a mistake I've seen many times. The point of a function is to reference multiple code, or like a big code line, multiple times. You wouldn't want to use a function for a singular value, but you would use a function for a big chunk of code, or at least 2 lines of code. Alright, if that makes sense. So we have our local function, you know, Bobby. We'll call this Bobby. And we want to reference this function multiple times. So what do I mean by reference? Okay, reference means I call it multiple times. So Bobby, and then I call Bobby again. Bobby, and then Bobby again. You know, this is good. This is really good for calling the same function more than once, okay? And that's just really good for our system because we're using the same function to call it multiple times. Now, a common mistake I've seen is just calling the function once. Alright, if you're calling the function once and you're never calling it again, then what's the point of using the function? What's the point of using a function if you're gonna only be calling it once in your entire script line? Okay, it just wouldn't make any sense. So always use functions when referencing it multiple times. And another thing I've seen too was using a function to store a singular value. Okay, if you're doing return means that it's gonna equal the function. So the function is gonna equal the return value. And we'll do return, you know, weld constraint, for example. Okay, so Bobby would now equal weld constraint. If we print out Bobby, it should say weld constraint, okay, because we're returning weld constraints. We're gonna run this and it's gonna say weld constraint because we're returning that from the function. You see, weld constraint. And I've seen this many times. You're using a function for one singular thing. Okay, you should use a function for at least 2 lines of code. Let's say if we had, you know, another type of thing we want to do in here. Let's say we'll use another print. Okay, we'll do print this function is running. Now you would have this function is running. Now you would have like more important code. This is just an example, but at least I'm using the function to not just reference a singular thing. I'm using the function to reference multiple things. Okay, for referencing multiple things. Okay, that's also another thing, and not singular values. Okay, because this without this print statement, this is a singular value, returning one singular thing. Okay, let's stop that. And yeah, that's the number one thing. Okay, now the second thing is you would always want to use local functions. Now you can always use local functions in this scenario. Always use local functions for connect. Okay, and connect event. And connect event is like game.players.player added. Game.players.player added equals connect. You see connect right there. And then you would have your local function. Okay, over here you would put local function on player added, and then automatically the object. Now with player added, the argument would be player. Like player would be created automatically from this connect operator. The connect would transfer player, which is the singular player that's being added into the game, and then we put the function inside of connect. So on player added, like that. So this is like the best way of creating a player added connection. Okay. What I've seen many times is people use global functions, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just there's a slight benefit of using, local functions, and local functions are more new, and that makes it a little bit more performant because it's up to date. Okay, and like I said, you can't call the function above the line, so that makes locals better. Always use local variables. Local variable, I'm calling it variable. Value, I'll call it value, equals false. I mean, always use locals when you can. Workspace, this can be workspace. Value can be workspace. Always use locals because you're saving it, you're storing it before the code runs, and then when the code runs, you'll be storing the value, so you could call that value multiple times as well. I just noticed that was like the incorrect way of writing a local variable. I did local value equals workspace. I mean, you could do this, but like you could just reference workspace right on the dot. You should only use local variables if it's at least like 1 point down. Like if it's workspace dot baseplate, it would make more sense, and you're gonna be like saving that specific spot. If it's just workspace, then this is bad because you know what I mean. It just better just use workspace. You know what I mean? Just go straight with workspace. Always use value if value equals workspace. You know what I mean? But if you need baseplate, then you would do workspace dot baseplate, and you would put that in a value because it's at least 2 lines down from these guys. Okay. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. Same thing with game.players. You should do that with game.players. Local players equals game.players because that's a point down. That's 1 point down. So yeah, that's a good starting point because you're doing game. You have to get game with players. I wish you didn't have to. I wish you could just do it like this. But that was only for workspace. Because workspace you don't have to do game.players or game.workspace. You can just go straight to workspace. But players you have to do game.players. I hope that makes sense. And yeah, let's get back to the video. Okay, so game.players.player added connect function player. And yeah, this is what I've seen many times. You can definitely utilize the local functions instead of doing this, okay, because this is a global function. And yeah, always use local functions for connect event. And the final thing is to you can only use global functions, global functions being transferred from a module. Okay, from a module script. You can only use global functions being transferred from a module script. Now, module scripts may seem scary for beginners, but it's so simple. Okay, what a module script does. Okay, we'll open up a module script. The point of a module script is to transfer code from one point into many different scripts. Okay, same thing as a function in a sense. Okay, you use a function when referencing it multiple times and not singular values. Okay, so the same thing with module scripts. Okay, you're using functions and you can call those functions into many different scripts. That's the point of a module, to call functions into many different scripts. And you're using that function multiple times. You're not gonna like define that function in a module script and only reference that function once, because like we just talked about, you want to use a function not one time but multiple times. Okay, and actually this just brought me an idea. Another common mistake I've seen was in a while loop. Okay, let's say we have while true, do, and then we have task.wait. And task.wait is just the better version of wait. The better version of wait. And if you don't know why I say this and why it's true, definitely I will link that in the description as well as to why you should use this over wait. Okay, over this guy, wait. Even though wait looks so innocent, task.wait is the better version of wait because it's up to date. Okay, and yeah, in a loop, this is what a proper loop would look like. People would use the function. Okay, we have our local function. Let's make a local function here. Local function. Call pathfinding or something. Call pathfinding service. That's the function name. Pathfinding service is for NPCs. Call pathfinding service, and they would call it like that. And even though it's referencing, well, it's not referencing it. It's calling the function multiple times. It's not the same as referencing it. Referencing it is when you type it out twice. Call pathfinding service. Call pathfinding service again. Call pathfinding service again. That's the proper way of using a function. This right here is bad because you're using the function, and although it's going down multiple times, there's really no difference because it's not being referenced multiple times. It's being called multiple times, but it's not being referenced. Like I said before, this is not the same as referencing. Unless if you put call pathfinding like I said before, then this is good. Okay, and yeah, I hope that makes sense. So do not use local functions if you're gonna be typing it out once. Okay, this basically means if you're gonna be typing it out one time, calling it one time by typing it one time. Okay, in this scenario, I'm typing it out once, so the function is really worthless. Okay, there's no point in using a function. I could just put the code directly inside of the while loop. Okay. And yeah, I just wanted to get that out of the way because it's important. It's a common mistake. It seems like it makes sense because local functions do save the code, but it's to save code that you're going to be using in multiple different callings or multiple different referencings. Okay, and let's go back on track with the modules. Okay, you can only use global functions being transferred from a module script. So in a module, you would have your function here, function, and then module, and then you would have the function name. We'll call this name, get. No, we would use something like weld together. Weld together is a function I love to use in my module. Okay, in my personal module. And this module is, this function is very simple. All it does is it just welds parts together. And welding is a very common thing that you're probably gonna be doing in many different scripts. You're gonna be doing instance.new weld constraint. Okay, so it would be like this: local weld equals instance.new weld constraint, and then you would weld the parts together. You would do weld.name equals weld, my weld, give it a good name, and then the weld.part 0 equals, part 0, because that's the argument, and then weld.part 1 equals part 1. And yeah, this is like a really good function I use in many different scripts. All this does is that it just welds things together. And I'll be using this function in many different scripts. Okay, not in one script. I'll be using it in this script. I'll be using it in this script. Okay, or at least in 2 scripts. It doesn't have to be 3 scripts. It has to be at least 2 scripts because that's the point of a module, to transfer a function into many different scripts. Okay, and this is a global function, no doubt. So, like I said, you can only use global functions being transferred from a module script. Okay, and another thing is you should only use local functions. You can't use local functions in a module, right? If we did module.weld constraint, and then we have, you know, the arguments. At this point right here is going to error, so we can't use local functions in a module because it's going to be imported or required into many different scripts. And required means that you're going to be calling the module. Okay, if you're going to call a module, it has to be globalized if the module is going to be a global function. Okay, or if the module is going to be transferred. Okay, untransferred modules, I mean untransferred untransferred functions in a module, you can keep it local. Okay, what do I mean by that? That's very confusing, Gabe. I'm very lost right now. This is a very confusing video. I'm sorry. I'm trying to make this as easy to understand. But in a module script, if you have a local function in here, local function, let's say this function we're going to use it multiple times. Just pretend, let's just call this name giver. Okay, we'll just call this name giver. We'll just do a print. Okay, we'll print Bobby again because Bobby is very cool. Alright, and let's say we're gonna call this function multiple times. Now you can use local functions in a module script. That's the point I want to say. And like we talked about before, you should use local functions in a module when you can, okay? If the function is not going to be transferred. Okay, the thing about local functions in a module is that you cannot call them into your script. Okay, when you acquire the module, you can't call this function into your script, name giver. But you can call module.wait together because it's connected to module and it's a global function. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And like we talked about, you should be calling this local function multiple times. Okay, name giver, you know, over here we'll put name giver again for some reason. You know what I mean? We're calling that one function multiple times. So use local functions in your module when you can, is what I'm saying. But local functions are only for that specific script. Okay, I should have just said that. But local functions are only for a specific script. You cannot use local functions to transfer things from a module. Okay, and so always use local functions for connect event like game.players.player added. Any type of connect event, you can use local functions. You definitely can. Even with remote invoke, I thought you couldn't, but you can with remote invoke. So if we have a remote function, that's an invoke, and we'll call it local remote function equals game dot replicated storage dot remote function, and then we do remote function dot invoke. That's how you would on server invoke. Okay, we'll do on server invoke equals on server invoke. Oh yeah, and then we would have these parentheses need to disappear, and then we would equal that to you know, the function. Okay, we have the function here, local function connect invoke. Okay, we'll call it connect invoke. Okay, you can call the function anything. We'll call this, you know, my invoke, and we'll put my invoke. So yeah, this is how you would call a local function from a remote function. The only time you only have to use global functions is only for modules. Okay, you can use a local function and a remote event, and this is how you do it. You do on server invoke, and then you do the local function. The same thing as kind of like player added. Okay, as we did player added before, we connected it inside of the connect parentheses, and we put on player added inside of the parentheses. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Always use local functions for connect events. You can only use global functions being transferred from a module script. Okay, you can use local functions in a module script. Just make sure that you realize that that local function is not transferable, and you should be using that local function multiple times in that module. Like we talked about, always use a local function, or always use functions multiple times. Always try to use local functions when you can. Okay, and yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. I hope you guys liked today's video. I try to make it quick, and I hope that this was understandable for you guys. And I'll see you guys next time.